Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the episode of Tatami Talk. My name is Juan. This is my partner, Anthony. This is another judo podcast for judo players by two judo players. So, Anthony, I ain't give it how you're doing right now because we got to get through this. We just did a crazy long interview that's going to be great to watch. But we got to get some meat and potatoes right here, all right? Get some protein.
This was the special guest I was talking about bringing on. I was really nervous about asking him because this is the first guest that we got that wasn't someone we know, and it wasn't like within the judo community where I can be like, hey, can you introduce me to this guy? And it's also a pretty serious discussion. So I really had to study up on a lot of stuff for this. I actually spent a lot of effort preparing for this interview. So please look forward to it.
Yeah. So I just want to go through some quick MMA judo news. So as some of you may or may not know, Kayla is fighting UFC 300 and she's cutting down to 135. If you follow her
135?
I mean, 135.
Oh my God. Okay.
Remember, she's going to 135.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Remember, she fights someone like 55. She's fought at 145 before at Invicta. And for UFC, they're forcing her to fight at 135. That's what makes the whole crazy thing is, can she make weight? So if you follow her on her Instagram or any of her other social medias, I follow her most on Instagram. She says her weight cutting is going well. She's ahead of schedule. I hope she makes weight because what's the woman she's fighting's name? Holly Holmes said that if she doesn't make weight, I'm not doing a catch weight with her. I am not fighting her. So I hope she makes weight. She says she's on it. So we're going to watch 300 at Anthony's house. We might do a live view of that one, me and Anthony watch her. Yay. And she's on the prelims. So some other MMA judo news that's coming out is some of you may or may not know, I've been promoting it. Ronda Rousey has a new book coming out. This is her second book. Her first book was mostly about her judo career, family stuff, and kind of a little bit of like how her career was going at the time. So it didn't have any of her end career, didn't have any of her WWE stuff. And after that, so her first book was called My Fight. Her new book coming out on April 2nd, which will be out by the time this podcast is out, is called Our Fight. And this one goes through a lot of her end of career stuff, how she dealt with the losses, depression she went through, goes through about a lot of her concussion stuff that she had before in jiu-jitsu and how maybe got worse in MMA, and how her pro wrestling career.
You mean judo?
Judo. Yeah. In judo and stuff, and how her career has gone now in pro wrestling and her experiences working in the WWE. So it's very interesting. I'm going to get it when it comes out. I got her first book as well. So I think it's a good read for people. And this is something big that's, for me, there's not a lot of judo autobiographies from Americans or in America. So that's why I'm promoting it. Something that I think people should be, just keep their eye out for, get on your Kindle, why not?
Yeah.
So Anthony, you said that we had some viewer questions from our last insurance episode you want to get to real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because a lot of people are comparing. They're like, well, why can BJJ do this? I thought it was like kind of clear and people can connect the dots. But basically, you're paying for it one way or another. Whether like in judo, you got to pay that annual judo organization membership, right? And all the judo clubs within the organization pull together for kind of like, how your employer gives you employer insurance for certain companies. You're all pulling together your risk. So that's the same thing with the national governing body. With jiu-jitsu, you're basically paying for, they have their own private insurance, assuming their own business, right? So you're paying for it. Also, with that said, you'd be surprised. A lot of jiu-jitsu places are underinsured. I mean, we were underinsured too for a while, but you'd be surprised how many Brazilian jiu-jitsu places are underinsured. So that's another reason they don't factor in that cost.
Any martial art you do, whether it's judo, karate, kickboxing, MMA gym, your insurance is built into your price. Like you're paying for the insurance. It's just not upfront how we do it at judo. Like, oh, join the federation. No, it's built into the cost of your membership.
Yeah. Let me see if I'm trying to pull up the answer that I wrote. High fees include the cost. Yeah, if you're in a community center, then you're probably paying into it. Or if you're in part of the school, they have their own insurance, like wrestling programs do. But what really matters from the customer's perspective is that they don't want to be tackling on so many fees. Like, oh, you got to pay for this, the NGB fee, then you got to pay our fee, you got to buy a gi, and then there's a sign. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are perceived differently. So, for example, someone might be more willing to pay $250 a month compared to us, which is like $60 or $70 a month, but we have like 3 or 4 fees tacked on because they seem like, oh, that's a lot of things that they're trying to nickel and dime me on. So someone also mentioned that they think judo's more risky for injury, so that's why requires so much insurance coverage. But I don't think that's what people are worried about. Most people that are doing this insurance is worried about lawsuits, whether it's from injury or negligence or sexual assault, whatever. They're worried about getting sued. Because I think most people that get injured, assuming it's not like a crazy injury like that neck injury we talked about, most of them are going to just use their own health insurance. They're not even going to claim the health insurance policy that the dojo's purchased, with certain exceptions. But most of the time is to prevent you from getting sued. So you want to look at, as an owner, you want to look at how risk tolerant you are to getting sued and how much money you want them to pay out and how much you can afford in the policy. And something you should do is review the policy every year anyway to see if you're covering your bases, because situations change, like your rent, the amount of students you have, everything is different every year. So that's something you should review every year. Anyway, that's it. So you want to talk about the guests we have?
Yeah, go ahead. So go ahead, talk about it, Anthony.
Yeah, so we got James de Lacey from Sweet Science of Fighting. He has a podcast that talks a lot about strength and conditioning for lots of things, but this is mostly an episode that's talking about judo. He has a judo specific strength and conditioning program that he is selling on his website. It was mostly he gave most of the credit of developing that program to Cas de Wit, who is the strength and conditioning coach for the Dutch national team. He has 2 or 3 episodes on judo. 2 of them were with Cas de Wit on his podcast channel. I'll link it in the description. I highly recommend you check it out. I'll say before listening to the podcast episode, but in this case, I think you should listen to it after, because we talk about a lot of the things in more layman terms. So when you go listen to it in that context, I think it's easier to understand, especially if you don't know a lot about energy systems or anything. Yep.
All right. So with any further ado, let's get to the interview. Hey, everybody, we're here to interview now. We're here to interview James de Lacey. He's the owner, creator, and head speaker of Sweet Science, the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast, correct?
Correct.
So I said it right?
Yep, you said it right.
All right. I was really worried about getting that whole name correct in my head. So you're science of training for martial arts and training for other sports. What got you into the martial arts, and what martial arts do you practice?
So currently I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now, just purely no gi. So it's just submission grappling. It's so much more fun than doing a bunch of gi stuff as well. So that's what I'm currently doing. I started in 2014. So 10 years ago, but I've probably, within that time, probably only trained half of that, if not less, just obviously with travel with work and being away in training camps with different teams and stuff like that. It's not conducive to training often, but being here now, I'm training a bit more. So funny enough, I got into it at my old weightlifting club back in New Zealand. So we had a weightlifting club and a warehouse style gym. And we had a whole bunch of different people training there, not just weightlifting, it was just an open gym as well. And one of the guys there who worked there and things like that, he was big into jiu-jitsu. He was part of Mark Hunt's training camps and things like that. And he just started teaching. You're telling me
Mark Hunt trains jiu-jitsu? I don't believe that.
No, no, part of Mark Hunt's training camps for MMA. And he just plays stand-up. And then he just my friend just started teaching me and a couple of friends there for free. I think once or twice a week. I can't remember what it was. No, we just had mats in the corner. We just pulled the mats out onto the floor in the gym. And he'd just teach us like an hour and a half every Wednesday or so, just basic jiu-jitsu shit. We didn't know shit. And then we just entered no-gi nationals after a few months of training. And that was pretty much history from there. I'm just and then then trained overseas in Romania. That's when I first learned some gi stuff, and then here in America and all sorts. So trained around a bit, but that's pretty much what I've been doing.
And to let people know, you're originally from New Zealand. You just recently moved to America, or you moved to Austin, right?
Yeah, in Austin. So we moved back here June 2022, but I was living here like 2016 to 2018, was living in Romania after that for a couple of years, in Romania as well back in like 2015. So been all over the different place for various strength and conditioning roles.
All right, cool. So how did you come up with, or how did you come to like how we came up with Tatami Talk and stuff, come with the concept of wanting to start a podcast of the sweet science of fighting?
Well, originally started, it was a website, had the blogs that I was writing on different things like how to punch harder, strength training for jiu-jitsu, judo, whatever it is. And then I just got to a point where I was like, I want to do some YouTube stuff. And I had a network of coaches and stuff that I worked with through my various career and people I knew. So I just thought it would just be a kind of a good addition to it. I started hosting a podcast for another company outside of the sports space. I kind of got the hang of that. Wasn't too hard to do. So I was like, sweet, okay, I'll start one for my own thing. And I kind of started, and it hasn't stopped. It's been awesome because I've been able to collaborate with some fucking awesome coaches too with that. I know you guys listen to that Cast of It podcast on his judo stuff from the Dutch Olympic team there. And yeah, I've just been able to bring on some awesome guests on there. I just keep going and collaborating, and that's just why I keep doing it.
Well, I want to thank you for coming to our podcast. Anthony's been wanting to talk to you for a while. He's very interested in your stuff because he's very interested in different ways of training. And that's one thing that we're going to talk about today. So Anthony, go ahead. I know you want to ask some questions.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go over every single thing that you guys went over in the Castawitz interview in your podcast. So I'm going to link it in description. There's 2 parts. I'm going to, for the listeners out there, probably you want to listen to those 2 episodes afterwards. But I mainly want to talk about, let's start with training programs. Right? Mm-hmm. So what do you think about traditional strength training programs like 531 and Starting Strength that's like gone viral on the internet over the years that everyone basically tells beginners, like recreational people to do? So if someone comes into the dojo, they're like, hey, I want to like get stronger for judo. I don't know anything. And most of the time people are like, all right, do the big 3 or the big 4 lifts and follow one of these templates from these programs. Yeah. What's your opinion on those for, let's just say both judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu? Because I think those programs are most often recommended for both of them.
Yeah, those pure strength programs basically born out of that powerlifting world. Yeah, I remember even 10 years ago, people would be like, just do starting strength. And that was the answer to every problem someone had. I'm not a huge fan of starting strength. I don't think they're a bad place to start if you're getting into it yourself, you're not quite sure what to do, because they just provide a very basic outline of what to do. They give you a very basic way of progressing exercises. You'll get stronger. The only issue is around a lot of these programs is typically the volumes you're doing. Well, when I say 531, there's so many variations of 531 now. I can't say the volumes are a problem because you can so many different ways to do it. But generally,
people put their names on it too.
Exactly. So obviously, you have typically too much volume, typically not enough exercise variation, and then typically you're not touching on other aspects of strength and conditioning outside of maximal strength or hypertrophy style training, which typically can become a problem down the line. Now, as a ranked beginner, not going to matter too much because you're going to improve everything no matter what you do. For example, like ranked beginners get stronger from things like running. You know, it's cardio exercise. It's not exactly a strength exercise. So that kind of underscores the general philosophy around beginners. Now, the reason I think you can probably do better than those programs is because at some point you're going to want to transition or need to transition to doing other things. And that might be speed, power-based movements, throws, jumps, plyometrics, those kinds of things. And if all you've been doing is strength training and hard, like quote unquote bodybuilding work, going into those things, you're not prepared. And the idea is that you want to essentially prepare your body to be able to do these things more intensely further down the line. Now, obviously, Starting Strength 531, they prepare you well to be lifting heavy weights, but they don't prepare you well to move quickly. And that's where some of the issues might arise, where someone does, say, 6 months, a year of these types of programs, and they realize, oh, maybe I need to do some more speed or power-based work. And instead of starting at the very beginning with those, they go in and they start doing the intense stuff, jumping off boxes, jumping over boxes, hurdle hops, all these various things, and they blow themselves up. So it's more of the fact that if beginners can build the base of everything they need initially, you're probably going to be better off. But that's not to say that those programs won't give you any benefit. I just think there are potentially better options that you could run.
Yeah, personally speaking, I started strength in college, so that was like 10 years ago, and I definitely see the physical gains, right, and the numbers increasing. Sure. But I don't see a lot of transfer over to judo, because I personally feel like there's a lot of pulling movement that's missing from the program, and that's really important in judo. Yeah, and rotation, and that's actually. I'm working with a physical therapist right now, and he's saying a lot of my knee problems right now are caused by my weak rotational trunk strength. So we're working on that now. So I definitely understand what you're saying. So about the interference effect, I know in Castawatt's interview that you interviewed him, when you guys discussed that briefly, but can you briefly explain what the interference effect is, and for a recreational person that works like a 9 to 5, like where they can't possibly like do like maybe they have kids, they can't do a morning workout and then like an evening judo session. How big of a loss would it be to lift weights right before or right after the judo or Brazilian jiu-jitsu training session, and whether it's a good idea or not to do that, or just not lift at all?
Yeah, for anyone, but even for recreational competitive athletes or people who are just kind of doing judo or jiu-jitsu as a hobby, I mean, that's probably the last thing to worry about is this interference effect. And for anyone who's listening who's not quite sure, it's basically that if you're doing, say, strength training and aerobic style training, so strength and conditioning, I guess what people will say is you can't do both together because, quote unquote, they cancel each other out, or they diminish the gains from one or the other. And it's the idea that you should split your strength training and your conditioning work as far away as possible to try and avoid these effects. And often this stems from the idea that, strength training has or elicits certain adaptations, conditioning other adaptations, these adaptations compete. And when you look at it you look at it in the practical, in the real world, and you look at it within the research, you see the interference effect isn't really that big of a deal. And especially if you don't have time, it really isn't a big of a deal. And if we start with just practical real world stuff, look at CrossFit, look at every team sport on the planet. You have guys getting bigger, faster, stronger, more conditioned every season, yet they're having to put everything together in one thing. For example, when I was working in professional rugby, sometimes we'd train 3 times a day. And in the morning, you would be double sessioning. So you'd be on the field and in the gym, or in the gym then on the field, and that would be 2 hours. You'd break for 4 hours or so, then you're back on the field in the afternoon. And it's like, how are you expected to make gains if interference effect is such a big problem in that kind of area? Then you go into the research. I actually pulled this paper up before so I could cite it for anyone who's interested in reading it. It's open to read. It's called Compatibility of Concurrent Aerobic and Strength Training for Skeletal Muscle Size and Function. It's probably the newest meta-analysis, basically combining all the available research there is on the topic and putting it together. But essentially, they're saying that for strength and muscle gain, that there isn't really much difference between just doing strength training versus combining the strength training and conditioning. There might be a small negative effect on explosive strength, and that's regardless of whether you're putting the strength and conditioning together in one session or if you're splitting them apart. Now, regardless, your goal isn't to maximize one of these qualities. Being a combat sport, it's a mixed sport. So you need to have good progress in all of these domains and physical qualities. So regardless of trying to maximize one or whatever, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to do them all. Now, regarding lifting before or after training, I found grappling sports in particular tend to do well lifting before. It's almost like an extended warm-up. But again, there's a caveat to that. That's not going in and doing 15 sets of chest and then the following day going in and doing 15 sets of back. Because if anyone's ever done some kind of high-volume bodybuilding style training and then tried to do anything, then you run into issues, fatigue, potential increased risk of injury, etc. So the idea is that if your program is well put together, for example, going from a lower-ish volume training program, starting with more speed-based movements, maybe going to more maximal strength heavy movements, but you're not doing multiple sets of one muscle group, when you go into your grappling training, you still won't feel so fatigued that you can't do the training. That's where I think it fits best. Lifting after training, I have done it. It is hard. I find I'm too sore and fatigued. And I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that too. So typically it's best, I'm not gonna say it's best. Typically it is a good option to strength train before. And then if you're going to do conditioning or whatever, you can do that after. I think that kind of fits best in terms of the hierarchy of the orders of exercise.
Got it.
I have a question about that real quick though.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about training before working out, do you mean like an hour before, or you do like you said, I have a warm up, like, okay, I get to the dojo like a half hour early. I do some bench press, some curls and stuff before I go on the mat, or I do squats or lunges before I get on the mat. Or you're talking about like maybe my morning thing, like before I wake up, but like before my noon wake up, my noon workout or something, you know, I do my weight training workout. And then that night I go to the dojo that night and I do my randori or my whatever class. Which would be better, like doing it in the morning, putting some time between it, or like you said, doing like a warm up a half hour before class?
Depends on the session, but typically I've done both and they both feel good. So obviously if you're doing the morning of and you're doing morning of strength training and evening technical training, then you can do a little more in the morning, which is fine because you have that time to recover. When it's just before class, you're probably going to do a little less. Typically, like if your volume's low enough, so like a really easy example session, right? If you were going to the dojo 30, 45 minutes beforehand, if you did say a series of maybe jumps and throws, let's just say like 2 to 3 sets, then you did maybe one full body power exercise. And that could be any kind of Olympic weightlifting derivative. It could be a heavy medicine ball toss. It could be some lightly loaded jumps. Could even be a kettlebell swing. 2 to 3 sets, and you're doing like 3 reps. Then you might finish with, let's just say, 1 lower body, 1 upper body strength exercise. So you're doing, let's just say, squat and bench, just to keep it easy. Squat, maybe you're doing like 3 sets of 3, 80 to 85% 1RM. So it's enough load, but it's not heavy enough where you're maxing out and grinding. The reps are still smooth. Maybe doing the same thing on bench press, done. You'll feel pretty damn good after that. You won't feel too fatigued going into whatever you're doing next, but you're still going to make gains because the goal is to be consistent, right? If you're just doing that once every 2 weeks or once a month, not much is going to happen. But if you're just doing that every week and you're just consistently getting that work in, it stacks up. And that's where I think a lot of people fall short. They think they need to do everything in this one session or everything in this week. And then they get into that problem of now they've just loaded all these different sets on top of each other and then fatigued. And that's obviously, of course, if judo jiu-jitsu is your number one priority, right? Because not everyone is going to the gym and like that's not the number one. Some people are doing it just for some fun and some cardio to learn, and they're lifting weights just to look good and be big and strong. Obviously, that's a whole different ball game that you can pretty much ignore everything I'm saying if that's your goal.
So like I know with us, like I'll come like on Saturdays. I have a lot of time on Saturdays, so I'll come in. I'll do my own weight training workout before I teach my class, and I'll do randori after that. So I'm there at the dojo. Well, me and Anthony at the dojo all day on Saturdays. I know like we have a lot of guys that I don't know if they do weight training during the day or during the week, but they'll come to class and then with the half hour after class where we're cleaning up, they'll do a little bit of weight training afterwards. Yeah. That we see a lot of that. I know Anthony does that sometimes. Yeah. Bad boy.
It's whatever. I do low volume, so I've been listening because I used to do what James said not to do, and I definitely felt the fatigue. And I thought maybe I was drinking too much the night before training, but then I cut out the alcohol, and I was still like, man, I'm still tired. Then I realized I was like probably doing too much volume.
Volume's a killer.
Yeah. So, how important is hypertrophy for judo and BJJ? Because as someone who spends too much time on the internet, which is how I found you, there's not a lot of content out there about, let's just say, gi grappling, because I'm sure there's some wrestling stuff out there, but there's not a lot of content out there about gi grappling or judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and strength and conditioning. The only one that I found that was very, how do you say, scientific based is Mike Israetel. I'm sure you're familiar with him. But I think he comes from a perspective of bodybuilding, and like if you have a hobby of bodybuilding and also doing grappling, like how do you handle that?
That's definitely his audience.
Yeah, that's his audience. So for those of us who aren't into bodybuilding, and he really emphasizes on maximizing hypertrophy. So how important is hypertrophy for grapplers?
It depends on weight class as well, right? Because obviously you can't just to build mass if you're going to, unless you're wanting to move up weight classes. But yes, typically muscle mass is going to help you, especially in grappling. Regardless, being bigger and stronger is always or typically an advantage. You see, obviously, the massive roids going on in no-gi jiu-jitsu currently.
What? No, you're kidding me, right? Oh my God, I am shocked.
Acai, sorry.
I do not. What? You're telling me that they do not test at all, and people are cheating? Oh, my word!
Natty's on it. It's all natty, but yeah, I mean, being big and strong is helpful, and having the muscle mass that, and a lot of I guess sports that are more forward thinking, a lot of their strength conditioning, they call it, body armor, right? Having that on there can help reduce the stress of impacts and things like that. So yeah, having some muscle mass is important, but it's not easy just to build muscle, because people just think, oh, I'm just not going to do hypertrophy training, or if I do bodybuilding style training, I'm going to get too big for my weight class or too big for jiu-jitsu. I'm going to be slow, etc. Obviously, it depends on the way you train. If you're just doing bodybuilding style programs, yeah, you're probably going to run into problems of losing speed, etc. I mentioned at the beginning, when you're just doing, say, heavy lifting or heavy bodybuilding style stuff, you don't touch on the other stuff, and that's where the issue comes. But for general hypertrophy, yeah, you just don't need to do the same volumes, because again, you're not trying to maximize hypertrophy or muscle growth in these instances. You're trying to do training that complements what you're doing on the mats. And if you're on the mats 3 to 5 to 6 times a week, you can't go and be doing these hardcore upper lower or push pull leg programs that are 4 to 6 times a week of 10 plus sets of one muscle group each day, because there's just no way you'll recover between everything you're doing. Yeah. So I think the recommendation, you can build muscle in even as low as, I think, 4 sets per week per muscle group. Now, when we're building muscle as well, you're going to think of like effort. So typically you're looking to go for bigger compound movements, something like 2 to 3 reps shy of failure. You don't have to go to failure, especially on those big compound movements. You probably don't want to, especially as a practitioner who needs that you perform on the mats. For your lighter isolation stuff, yeah, you can go like 2 failure or like 1 to 2 short, and you're still going to get some of those benefits. But it's just about accumulating some of those sets. And typically, depending on your recovery, what else you're going on, etc., is probably going to dictate, how much of all that stuff you're going to do.
Okay. So one of the things that Mike Israetel talks about for hypertrophy was maximizing the range of movement on the correct me if I'm wrong, eccentric phase of the lift. So this might sound like bro science, but it's something I read. Like, people are saying for judo, for example, you don't want to doing half squats and lifting heavier weights is probably better, because you're never ever going to do a movement in judo where you squat all the way down like ass to grass. So do you think there's some truth in that, or whether you should maximize the eccentric phase to increase that hypertrophy and forget about the functional part of it and increasing the weight?
Every sport has the same argument, or has that same argument. Soccer, rugby, you're never going to squat that low when you're sprinting. What other sports? Every other team sport has had the same thing said about it, which is quite funny. There is, I
don't know, versus jiu-jitsu, you put your butt to the ground.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a reverse squat because you're pulling guards. So
yeah, exactly. If you're a dirty guard puller, then yeah, exactly. But there is, okay, I'm not gonna say there's some truth to that, but there is application for it, right? So typically a general easy good rule of thumb is further away from a competition, tournament, whatever, squat full depth. As you get closer, when you're maybe more peaking, quote unquote, for something, then you can do more half quarter squats. And one of the reasons is those half quarter squats tend to transfer better to vertical jump and sprint speed within the research, which then by proxy likely transfers better to judo and jiu-jitsu in terms of lower body power. So that's something you might want to do. Plus, a reduced range of motion typically reduces residual fatigue, right? If you're doing half reps, you're not going to have that fatigue carryover. So that's just a couple of things to, I guess, bear in mind if you're going closer to competition. But yeah, you want to do most of your lifts full range of motion, not just because of muscle growth, hypertrophy, but 1, for strength, 2, training at longer muscle lengths. You're essentially, it's mobility training as well. And when you start stacking on weight at shorter ranges of motion, those last bits of range of motion, you start to lose in terms of your general mobility.
That makes sense.
And if we, I mean, I can dive into some more deeper details about that, but yeah, that's just the general consensus.
Okay. So one of the things that Cass mentioned on your podcast was that during peaking phase that you mentioned, he would start reducing volume, but he would have the athletes do like, I think 2 reps, 2 sets or something like that to keep the strength going. Would you recommend that for someone that doesn't have like a recreational player that doesn't have like a peak? They're not preparing for a tournament, but let's say I have 30 minutes or 15 minutes in between meetings for today. Should I just like pump out two reps to maintain the strength I have versus not working out at all, or should I do some cardio instead or something like that?
Depends on the rest of the training week. If that's the only time you have, then go do it. If it's not and you already have your sessions planned, then you probably don't need to. But for the recreational person, in terms of peaking, no, you probably don't need to go to that extent in terms of peaking for something. But it can be good to at least, I guess, have some variation within your training, or at least some kind of training cycles within there where you might be doing a little more volume initially, potentially for some adaptation that, you might be a little more fatigued in the mats for whatever reason. And then maybe you have a period that's a little more intense and less volume in there. So again, as well, lifestyle factors, time you have, etc. Typically, I think for most, I guess, recreational competitive ones that aren't taking, that they want to take their grappling seriously and tournaments and stuff like that, just a general lower volume approach of consistency is probably better. Until you get to a point where, okay, now I'm really trying to peak for certain events. Because most people are kind of just competing when tournaments come up. There's a lot of grapplers that compete almost weekly. like it's a team sport now. So just having that consistency going through, there's no time to do any kind of peaking in that instance. So it's just having that consistent low volume of work going all the way through the year.
Yeah, I think one of the things I realized when I was listening to your interviews was that Cass talks about like professional, like cream of the crop top players, and then there's also your academy players. He never really fully described what an academy player is, but I assume that would be people who are on the national team already, and then there's people who are trying to be on the national team.
I think the academy was right? under 21. I think it was their age group. I think
so. So age group. Okay.
I think so.
In my mind, there's people who are like trying to make the Olympics, and then there are people who are serious competitors but not trying to make the Olympics, and then there are people who are just trying to survive through training. Like so. I'm thinking of people who are trying to do the last group that we're talking about. Yeah. So let's talk about energy systems, because I'm sure a lot of people aren't super familiar with it. My exposure to I guess what you guys call the traditional energy systems model was when I was training Muay Thai back in Austin. There's this website that used to be called Muay Thai Pros. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but they're shut down already. The website's not available. The website's not available anymore, as far as I know. But I have the article saved. They have to buy them. Maybe. No, but it was a multi-page like description of the aerobic system and anaerobic system. So I have like a very armchair kind of understanding of it. And I always thought they were just aerobic and anaerobic. So aerobic would be like your long steady state cardio, right? And then anaerobic would be like hill sprints and stuff, is how I understood it. But listening to your episode, you guys talk about lactic and alactic. I looked that up, but if you could like give a better explanation of how the general energy systems, like pretend I'm a college student and you're introducing this to me in a 101 class.
Did you listen to that?
We're in elementary school, okay?
Did you listen to the Andrew Usher episode?
No, I have it downloaded, but I have a list of all your stuff downloaded, but I actually re-listened to the judo episodes in preparation for asking these questions.
Yeah, this is tricky, man. I'm still trying to get my head around this fully in terms of, I guess, a newer shift in terms of conditioning and moving away from that traditional energy system approach. Man, it's confusing as shit. Even did a good job of explaining stuff. Andrew Usher he's doing his PhD on a lot of the stuff now, and that was really good to listen to. But essentially, the traditional model was around 3 energy systems. So you had the aerobic energy system, which you talked about before. You had the anaerobic lactic energy system, which is like the intermediary one. And then you had the alactic, which is like your fast sprint one. So but typically people think of it as alactic energy system is like 0 to 10 seconds, 100-meter sprint, right? People talk about that. Then the intermediary one might be like a 400-meter sprint. And then the aerobic will be like a marathon. And that's kind of how most people kind of block it. And then you'll see prescription of conditioning typically into these buckets: aerobic capacity training, aerobic power training, anaerobic lactic power, etc. And they'll use it to label, I guess, certain set and rep and intensity parameters. And typically your aerobic work in a traditional system is like your lower intensity stuff, zone 2, I guess, which has been bandied around a lot recently. And then you got your anaerobic side, which is like higher heart rates, you're breathing heavy. And then you got your alactic, which is like your full sprints, 6 to 10 seconds. And that model has been around for a long time. And I mean, even though it may not be scientifically correct, it works for a lot of athletes. It's generally easy to prescribe and I'm going to say understand for some, but the issues come down when you actually look at what's happening at the muscular level within a lot of these things, right? So when we talk about aerobic, we're talking about exercising with oxygen. Anaerobic is without oxygen, and then alactic is without lactate, but you can shove alactic within anaerobic as well. So if we just look at aerobic, anaerobic, with oxygen, without oxygen. And that means that if I'm doing a 10-second sprint, I should see no oxygen being used within the muscle because it's without oxygen. And I should see no rise in blood lactate because it's without lactate. And the issue is when you slap on one of those devices, essentially a device you stick on your muscle and it measures the oxygen saturation within the muscle. And you do a 10 or even a 30-second sprint and you see the sharp drop in oxygen saturation, meaning that the muscle is using oxygen. And so this idea goes out the window that nothing is really truly alactic or anaerobic because everything you're doing uses oxygen. So then when you're looking at conditioning from a way of improving someone's weakness or improving someone's ability, I like to talk about repeating high intensity efforts a lot. And I think pretty much all combat sports revolve around, a lot of mixed sports revolve around this idea of you have to be able to repeat hard efforts over and over and over again. And that's the sport, that's part of the fun, right? Think about MMA having to throw a flurry of strikes, shoot shots, etc. Then you're maybe on top of the guy on the ground and you can have a little break and then you're doing something else. Same thing in judo, you're group fighting and eventually you're going for a throw. And you're having to repeat this over and over. And it's the idea of being able to enhance this repeated high intensity efforts, basically a high quality of power output over and over and over without this huge decrement in that performance. And I guess a newer way of looking at it now is the idea of having a rate limiter. So basically a limiter in your conditioning. And typically we're seeing that as function of the heart or function of the muscles. And when we talk about the heart, we're talking about the ability to deliver that oxygen to the muscles. And for the muscles, we're talking about the ability to use that oxygen. And you can design conditioning to preferentially try and target one or the other. It doesn't mean that it's like isolated, like this is only doing this thing for the muscle. Same thing with energy systems, right? People think, oh, I'm just doing aerobic work, but everything, you can't isolate an energy system. They all work together. People think
there's a switch. Like it's like, oh, I'm past 12 seconds. Let me flip, my body will flip this switch and turn off one power generator and start using the larger generator or something.
Exactly. So they all work together. Same thing with these adaptations. Now, typically intensity would dictate the adaptations you want, but for the central function, you're essentially trying to enlarge one of the heart chambers, can pull more blood, then it can ideally pump more blood per heartbeat, so you're delivering more oxygen. Typically, those intervals would be considered more aerobic style intervals in the traditional model, right? Lower intensity work. There is some interval style work. I'm actually going to bring Evan back on the podcast, hopefully soon when he can, to go into more practical stuff as well. Yeah. So that's the more kind of central side. You're looking more at that low intensity work. And then the peripheral side or the muscular side, basically the ability to use that oxygen, you're looking at typically more sprint interval style training. So, 10 to 30 second efforts, or even 6 to 30 second efforts. And then you're looking at rests anywhere from like 10 to 60 plus seconds. You can even go even longer for full recoveries as well, like 2-3 minutes. As general guidelines, obviously, if you have the tech and equipment, you can get a little more individualized with it. But that's most of it in a nutshell. I will say as well that even though we say that maybe lower intensity work targets more of that central function and high intensity for the peripheral or muscular function, and I mentioned how it's not just in isolation. So for example, while say sprint intervals, say you're doing like 10-second sprints or 20 seconds rest, it's going to potentially improve the ability of the muscle to use that oxygen. It might not be best for improving the creation of new blood vessels to help deliver that oxygen, because the most amount of blood vessel density to muscle fiber ratio is seen in very elite endurance athletes who do a shit ton of very low intensity work. So there's still a lot of stuff like we don't know as well. But hopefully that makes sense. If I didn't go too crazy, I'm still trying to wrap my damn head around a lot of the stuff too, because obviously going through university and college stuff, you get taught, traditional energy system model. And you go into coaching and professional sport and you're still kind of using a lot of these models and you find success in doing a few different things. But then it's just kind of like trying to bring in new information to update everything.
Yeah, the traditional model is much easier to wrap my head around. I didn't go to school for it.
Definitely is.
But it's so easy to wrap around because they put things into strict boxes, right?
Yeah.
But from to summarize in my monkey brain of kind of translate what you said, you're basically saying the traditional model kind of works, but not because of the way that they described it. So we're now discovering that it's more complicated. But there is no new model to replace the traditional model yet, because we're still trying to discover how everything works. Yeah,
well, I think the new model's there, and there's still good research coming out on it all, and there are good results coming out on it. So that's there. It just hasn't. I think it's going to be hard for it to go mainstream because you kind of need the sports science background or the equipment to do it. Now, I will say practically, for people at home, we're going to be like, I can't do any of this shit. Like, I don't have the device. I don't know how it works. Like, it's whatever. So I typically use what I call like a funnel system. So essentially, you've got the sport that's in the middle, and that's like your middle intensity. So judo, jiu-jitsu, most of your training is going to be in this middle intensity zone. So the goal of conditioning most of the time would be to hit above that threshold and then below that threshold. So you can call it like a high-low training model almost, but there's a whole lot of different, I guess, fancy names for it. But essentially, you're going to train 1 day a week or sometimes twice of the very high power outputs. So that'll be like your, in the traditional terms, alactic power. So that'll be your 6 to 10 second efforts, 2 to 3, or full recovery, 2 to 3 minutes rest. And then you're going to do your very low intensity work, dog barking back there, low intensity work. And that'll be like your zone 2 steady state stuff. It could be your long, high intensity intervals in there as well. And that's going to hit kind of like your lower threshold work that you're going to get some in training, but you're not going to get a prolonged effort of it. And you're going to spend most of your time kind of going above and below there, because one, you're going to raise the ceiling and be able to essentially produce more power. One, you're kind of going to build a little bit of that base. Then as you get closer to competition, you can essentially bring them together into the more of that middle intensity stuff. So then you're going to do your alactic intervals in the traditional system at maybe the same 6 to 10 seconds, could be even up to 30, and you're going to do shorter rests. So instead of doing 2 to 3 minutes rest, you might be doing on the minute, you might be doing 10 to 30 seconds rest, whatever it is in there. And then for the aerobic side, again, you bring that up and that kind of meets in the middle as well. You're pretty much doing the same thing. You're either doing more of those intervals or you may be doing slightly longer in there. But essentially you're going from like a work to rest ratio on the higher end of very short working periods and very long rest periods. So it's like 1 to 6, 1 to 10, if not more. And then as you get further down, then you're looking at like 1 to 1, 2 to 1, depending on what you're kind of doing. So there's a lot you can kind of change as you go through, but typically it's just like flipping the work to rest from one end to the other. That just seems to be more practical for most people to get their head around and easier to implement than trying to be like, I'm peripherally limited, so I'm going to just do this stuff and then try and target central adaptations doing this, and then try and reassess later and then see what I need to do. This just gives a little framework that's just a bit more practical to kind of run through.
Okay. So I understand what you were just explaining at the end. Like this is what you need to do to follow the new data and the new science. But I don't want to drag this discussion on this topic for too long, because there's other stuff I want to ask. But for someone who wants to learn more about this new model. Is there a textbook or paper that you'd recommend? Or
yeah, there's a couple of guys. So Evan Pike on Instagram is a good guy to follow. Andrew Usher's research. I actually broke down one of his research papers on my YouTube channel on Sweet Science of Fighting. I'll have to send it to you after to put in the description. Yeah, okay. But essentially, he had professional boxers, pad work, bag rounds, and sparring rounds, and they essentially attached the device to their quad, one of their quad muscles, and basically showed that these fighters weren't limited. Essentially, they were limited. Their muscles weren't recovering between rounds.
Yeah.
And then they've just got more research coming out soon around sprint intervals. I mean, that him and his supervisor, Dr. John Babry, they've done a bunch of high intensity or sprint interval training studies showing these changes in basically in oxygen, what they call kinetics. And there's more coming out now. So they'll essentially watch the space. There's going to be more and more stuff coming.
Yeah, I was really interested in the episode you did with Evan and the device he's talking about. And would you recommend? Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you recommend a recreational person buying that device? Okay, good. my wife is happy to hear that.
Anthony's gonna buy it. No, Anthony's asking if it's okay for him to buy it. That's what he wants to know. Anthony loves these toys.
So for $400 and what it was the app to read the data,
$400.
It's like the price of an expensive judo gi. So,
oh god,
yeah. So would you recommend your average person stick to the typical chest strap heart rate monitor or anything in particular?
Yeah, that's easy enough. I mean, for people who don't have a background in any of this, you're just going to have paralysis by analysis on anything. The only reason to collect data is so it can influence your training. It's the same thing with testing as well, right? You see a lot of sports teams that have like testing days, testing here. Doesn't matter if the testing doesn't influence anything in the training. You're just kind of just wasting not just wasting one day, because testing is pretty intense. You're wasting a few days because you've got to recover from it. So that's just a general thing. Only collect data you're going to use.
Yeah, most programs that have some sort of testing phase involved tell you to rest like a few days before you do the testing day. So, and I hate that you actually brought up the next topic I want to talk about, which is testing. Like you did an episode with Cass on testing, but that's for high level strength and conditioning coaches and athletes. For your recreational athlete, how important is testing? Like maybe we're not going to do those. What's the popular thing that they do now? Would it test how much force you produce when you jump?
Wait, you're talking about like force play data and stuff?
Yeah, force. Yeah, I think that's being used a lot now everywhere I see.
Is it? Well, that's good.
Yeah, my PT just bought one because they train golf coaches. He trains professional golfers basically.
Yep.
So they're using that, and then they wanted me to test it out because I'm one of the few judo athletes that's taking that's with them. So how important is testing for your recreational athlete? Anything from something very complicated like that to just a heart rate monitor to just checking what your one rep max is and all that kind of stuff? Typically,
it's better just to monitor rather than think about testing. I think the thing is, testing can bring, for some people, can bring like anxiety, nervousness because, I got to test today. I got to make sure I eat right now, just so they can try and get a good test result, versus just monitoring weekly or monthly. For example, within your training, let's just say you bench press every week. That's one of your main lifts. You might just work up to an easy three rep, not a 3 rep max, but maybe just like a nice solid 3. See how that feels. In a month's time, at the end of your sets, you might do that again, and you can just monitor that. And if you're going to lift more in that 3 rep and it feels easier, you're going to be stronger. You don't need to test the 1 RM because if you're using percentages, you can program off that 3 rep max too. So it's just an idea of kind of monitoring your way through. Same thing with jumping, right? You could every Monday, if you were in the gym, you had the same routine. You could jump if you want to just like mark chalk on the wall. You could jump and get an idea of how, a proxy of lower body power is just by doing that. If you jump much lower than you did the previous week, hey, maybe something's off. Are you sore, fatigued, injured? Did you not recover well? Did you drink a lot on the weekend, Anthony? Things like things like that. So those are just a couple of small things. For conditioning, there's one, I think, really good test that you can do just for that allows you to prescribe your conditioning too, and that's like a maximal aerobic speed test. If anyone searches maximal aerobic speed, it's a relatively simple thing. Essentially, you pick a modality of cardio. It could be running, biking, rowing, but whatever you pick, you have to stick with that for your entire conditioning thing. And you'll do like a 1,200 or 1,600 meter time trial, or you could do a 5 or 6 minute time trial. Either or. Typically is easier to choose distance, because if you're running on a track and you stop at 5 minutes and you don't know like how far you've actually gone. So pick one of those, you finish the time trial, you take your distance in meters, you divide that by your time in seconds to complete it. So if you did a 1,200 meter time trial on a rower and it took you 5 minutes as an example, 1,200 divided by 300 seconds. And that gives you number 4. And that number 4 is a meters per second number. I'm going to make this not complicated. Think of that number. Think of that number as your 100%. And you can take that number and you can prescribe conditioning from it that is individual to your current fitness level. And I think even if you just search MAS intervals on Google, you'll probably find a whole bunch. And you just calculate from those things. So that time, that number in meters per second, you just multiply that by the number of seconds in the interval. So if you're doing, say, 15-second intervals at 100% of MAS, and 100% is that number, you do 15 seconds times 4, that's 60 meters. Because you're doing 15 seconds, you're doing 4 meters per second, multiply gives you 60 meters. That's how far you should go in that interval, as an example. And there's plenty of set and rep schemes you'll find on Google with that. And then obviously you can take lower percentages of your MAS, like 90% if you're doing more longer intervals, 2 minutes to 8 minutes kind of thing. You might be looking at 90% of MAS within that. And then if you're going very intense, you could go even higher. You could go 120, even in some cases, I think you can go up to 130% MAS. And then those would be like more higher intensity intervals. And it's individualized to you. So it's something that someone could do, and then they have like their own individual conditioning program essentially. So
what you just explained, I've listened to that 5 times. Like I kept rewinding it in the car when I was driving in your podcast episode. And I think this is like last week I bought your strength and conditioning program for judo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I went through it, and there is a Google spreadsheet.
Yes.
If I remember that, you can plug in the numbers. So for those of you guys who did not understand, don't feel bad. Like I had to listen to it multiple times too. And there's a spreadsheet that you can use.
Yep.
So I do want to talk about the judo program you're talking about, but before that, let's see. Okay. So I want to talk about kids. Do you have any?
Yep. I've got a 1-year-old. Yeah. I've got a 1-year-old that was in the background before.
Yeah. So would you recommend, strength and conditioning program, because most of judo is kids, right? It's a lot of, especially in America, most dojos, it's like 90% kids and then maybe like 5 adults. So for those coaches who are training, like, let's say 10 to like 16-year-olds, should they incorporate any strength and conditioning programs, or should they just do more judo? I'm assuming that's yes, but also I know some people say lifting weights
always
for kids
are more judo is always a yes.
Lifting weights for kids is like a bad thing, and also we all know some kids are just they just do dumb things when they lift weights. So.
Within judo, typically I think it should be within judo, within the sport, stick to that. For the strength conditioning, it probably should be done outside of it, typically. At least that's my view on it. And yes, all kids can strength train. It's much safer than anything else out there, and it's very beneficial for kids of all ages. Obviously, you're not throwing them under 1RM squats at fucking 5 years old, But
I want to do acid grass squats, right, with 200 pounds on the back.
Exactly. So typically within the dojo itself, I think it should just stick with judo. I think the strength conditioning should be taken care of outside of that on the mats, and that just becomes, I guess, a parental thing as well, right? Are they going to take their kids through that? Whatever. It could be a time thing as well. I think taking time away from the sport to do strength conditioning and say a 45-minute or 1 hour class, I think it's generally a waste of time. And I think it's a waste of money for most people paying for, because you're paying for the judo instruction in those cases. What can be a good addition instead is just using various games within those things. I mean, most dojos play dodgeball and shit like that, right?
We do a lot of tag in our dojo.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. That's more of your general physical preparation in there as well. I think that's good to have. It's fun. It's engaging. Kids' movements outside of the sport itself. So that's worth doing. But the actual strength conditioning side, I think, should be taken care of outside.
All right. But I think a lot of, on the counterpoint, I would say that some parents treat us as daycares, or they don't pay, or they don't, or like we have overweight kids come in, and I think some sort of strength and conditioning would help in that sense. Especially, those parents aren't telling their kids to go lift.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So I think if you're a serious competitive club, then I think what you said is really true. But if you're like have a full class of overweight kids, then I think
make them run laps until they puke.
Yeah,
you're good.
Well, I think if you have a full class of overweight kids, I think you might be the problem. Work your kids a little harder.
And we only have them like twice a week. There's only so much we can do.
No, you have 3 times a week, Anthony. You have
now
3
we
times
do,
a week.
yeah. But I know I've seen some parents bribe their kids with food after training. Like, we'll go to McDonald's afterwards, like. And
you're like, no, all my work is gone.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about your judo strength and conditioning program you have. I will say, with no offense, but not offense, but I had lower expectations and it really exceeded my expectations. So
I find that offensive.
Yeah. So I'll tell you why I had low expectations, because I buy these programs all over the internet just for my own curiosity, right? I won't name which ones I've tried, but I paid for a lot of them. Same thing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo Instructionals. Like I bought a lot of them just so I know, right?
I have free Jiu-Jitsu Instructionals on my Sweet Sounds of Fighting BJJ Instructional channel. Yeah, you should check that out.
I'll check that out. Right, you actually do advertise on your podcast on the ad segments. I kind of zone out on the ad segments.
I know. I'm gonna redo that. I'm gonna make them fresh again.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was really surprised because in the other programs I signed up, to put it in a nice way, I would say they're kind of useless, but to put it in a bad way, some of them are straight up scams, I would say. Yeah, there are.
Yours is not a scam. Yours is legit.
Yeah, yours is actually.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
There's and most of them are like really big, popular YouTubers or influencers that have trained like famous people. So I'm like, oh yeah, might as well. Well, it was good enough for Conor McGregor. I'm just throwing a name out there. Conor McGregor is good enough for me. And you guys also did an episode about cupping and KT tape and all that kind of stuff, the debunking it. And you're like, well, if it's good enough for this person who's a professional fighter and he's doing it, then why can't I do it? So I bought the programs and they're not custom. It looks like they just threw together a bunch of exercises into an Excel
That's
spreadsheet.
what most programs look like.
Yeah. So they were like, here's what you do. You have a strength phase on Monday, do these lifts and this, and it doesn't put into account your age, your fitness level, your injuries, and the type of sports you're doing. Some of them do a little bit, but it's like, okay, I could have put this together too. Like, why did I pay so much money for that? But your program, the first thing I read was the PDF document that was included. And it actually explains a lot of the stuff that we talked about already, just in more detail. So it actually helped me understand the stuff that I heard on your podcast a lot more. And I feel like it's teaching me how to put together a program that fits my schedule and my like style of training and judo, because I don't do hard randori every session. In fact, lately I haven't been doing randori at all. So I would probably have to do higher intensity sessions during my strength and conditioning sessions. So that's what I really like about your program. I have not gotten around to playing with the app yet because the PDF document was kind of a dense read for a week. I was like trying to cram that into this episode. But would you like to talk more about, I guess, expand on what I haven't said, like what makes your program different from all the other programs out there? And there's actually a few YouTube videos out there talking about strength training for judo. I don't know if you ever looked at them, but what makes it different?
So this one, all credit to Cass. So he put this together. He is the sports scientist / strength and conditioning coach for the Dutch Olympic judo team. So I met him over when I visited the complex over there with a few other colleagues there. So he basically put this together. I had a template. Actually, most of the programs within the app. So in the app as well, you got MMA, jiu-jitsu, and striking programs. So a lot of that is based off my grappling template, and he's got some awesome kind of more, I guess, quote unquote, specific judo stuff in there too that he likes to use, and a lot of his philosophy is in there as well. But essentially, it runs from an 8-week like accumulation block, and then you go into which basically layman's term for that is kind of like a more volume phase or a base phase. Then you have a transmutation block for 3 weeks, which is like more intense. So less reps, less fatigue, a little more speed and power. Then you got a peaking phase for 3 weeks, which is peaking for a competition. And so Cass put that together within there. And again, just like you mentioned, it's not just a bunch of exercises put together randomly or like a strength training program that's just doing like deadlifts, bench press, rows, abs, and then that's it. There's a hierarchy to the order of the program. He has a similar, I guess, training philosophy to me around, you start with your I guess you could say a general mobility style circuit warm up. You have like a robustness style circuit in there, I think, if I remember correctly, which kind of addresses some of the smaller stuff and issues that you may encounter when grappling. So it might be some ankle stuff, shoulders, elbows, that kind of stuff. And then you're going to go into your main power exercise of the day. And that could be, I think a lot in the judo programs is more specific to judo. So different kinds of, I guess, replicating a lot of different kinds of throws with medicine balls, sleds, etc., like that he's done with his athletes, and then into the more heavy strength work along with that with the lower body and upper body. So yeah, it's a program that's put together. It's 3 days a week. You don't have to do all 3 if you can't fit them. You can do 2. We detail as well how to fit it within your training week. You can make substitutes of exercises. We actually have a Discord community as well. So like Cass is in there, and he's helped a lot of people who are doing the program. If they're like, oh, I can't do this exercise, what's a replacement? Or I have this tournament coming up, how should I change things? Same thing, I've got a couple of MMA guys in the community. One guy just fought the other week asking how we should change the final week leading into the fight. So there's obviously all those perks along with that and with the program as well. So yeah, hopefully that gives everything. It has the conditioning too. So strength and conditioning for anyone wondering.
Yeah. So real quick, you mentioned the accumulation phase, transmutation. Okay.
Transformer phase.
Yeah, transformer phase, and then the peaking phase, right? So, is that the triphasic block that he was talking about? No. Okay.
Triphasic's born from Chaldeans, which is like traditionally you would do, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks of quote unquote eccentric focus, 3 or 4 weeks of isometric focus, 3 or 4 weeks of concentric focus. Most people now have shortened those to 2 weeks, and a lot of people kind of reverse the eccentric. Yeah, there's a whole lot of different stuff going on there. But yeah, there's different style of training, I should say.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't tried the Discord group yet because I was just doing that. But the monthly fee you guys charge is the same as one of the other popular programs I've tried, and so far I feel like it's worth the money. I'm just saying so far. So I'm going to have to join Discord community and
yes.
Anthony will. He will, trust me.
I will. I'll post a lot of memes.
Take advantage of it.
So I have a question about it though. So you train mostly BJJ, and I don't know how much judo or what you train and stuff, but Casper does the whole judo stuff for you. What was there like a big difference that you saw between like what you would do for BJJ compared to what you recommend or what they do for judo? Or are they similar, or what are the big differences?
Like in terms of the principles of training for sport, people think it's like just because it's a different sport, everything changes. I'm sure you've seen on Instagram people doing like quote unquote specific jiu-jitsu or judo stuff. I've seen people like holding De La Riva guard and someone pushing down on their knee as like a specific jiu-jitsu strength training exercise and things like that. But regardless, the principles of training for sport remains the same regardless of the sport, right? Mm-hmm. You're still trying to target speed, strength, hypertrophy, power, conditioning qualities. but the way you go about that might differ slightly. But the methods of developing those qualities are relatively the same. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is very, very similar. Obviously, some of the exercise selection may differ because he's trying to gain transfer to specific judo movements. Now, that's not to say that you need to replicate the sport in the gym exactly. A lot of time you shouldn't do that, and a lot of time it's a waste of time. But again, it depends on the exercises you're choosing, and it's not something that's like that's a funny one because I saw that jiu-jitsu one is a real. I think it's more prevalent in jiu-jitsu than judo probably in terms of what's on social media because of how popular jiu-jitsu has become. But that Deadlift heavy one cracks me up because it's like you've got your leg wrapped around someone's leg, you're playing guard, and someone's pushing down your leg to escape, and then your strength training exercises they're holding that isometric. But in a good jiu-jitsu player isn't just going to try to hold that position. You're going to transition to something else. Your goal isn't just to try to hold that leg there and grind against someone else pushing down on you. It doesn't make any sense in that regard. And what are you really getting out of that exercise in your gym work? Sure, you can strengthen some of the abductors or groin muscles doing a few different things. Do you need to be in that specific position and do it? Probably not. There are things you can do. So in terms of those differences as well, I don't think there's too many just because you're still trying to develop the same qualities of both sports.
Mm-hmm. So since you brought that up, I think we don't see a lot of this in judo because of how judo doesn't have like a good, they have a culture of not recording and posting your own training for whatever reason.
You don't have influences. That's the problem.
Yeah, we only have influences.
Not in America, we don't.
I want to say it's kind of more humble, and also a lot of people can see through the bullshit easily, I guess. Mm-hmm. But one of the things we saw recently that we posted was, I actually saw this morning on my feed. Someone was doing an Uchimata strength training exercise, and he had someone hug his leg while he was like lifting the guy up with his leg. Yeah. Would you say that's a good exercise?
Wait, so how was he? He had someone hugging his leg.
Yeah, he just like a koala. He just hugs his leg, and he does an Uchimata.
But then what was he holding?
He was holding on to a bar on the wall or something, and he was just doing like leg lifts. Like what do you call those? Like So
I mean, in terms of transfer, I don't know, man. I mean, the funny thing is you can have anyone do any of these exercises, and the best people in their sport will still be the best people in their sport, and it doesn't honestly. It really at the highest level. It doesn't matter. Even at the recreational level, you're probably just wasting your time doing a lot of that stuff. And the best athletes are the best athletes regardless. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen top level judo, jiu-jitsu, whatever combat sports fighters training footage, and it looks like shit. And everything about it is shit, but they're the best fighters. So everyone copies what they're doing. I mean, best example, Conor McGregor and Ido Portal. Is that how you say it? Portal? Mm-hmm. Everyone copying his touch button in the park, right? That was the rage.
Yes, that was his name. Yes.
That was the rage. Everyone was in on that movement. Now Ido's just probably sitting on an island somewhere, just banked it off the Conor McGregor fights. But is that going to be is that what made Conor McGregor doing that kind of movement? It's just one of those things.
Mm-hmm. One other thing I want to ask. So this is the last one, I promise. There was a guy doing seoi nage drills with a 20-pound kettlebell. Like he was swinging it around. Like
my judo terminology is not that
good. So seoi nage is like a shoulder throw.
Okay,
yeah. So he's holding.
What's a 20 kg kettlebell?
20 pounds, not kg.
20 pounds.
20 pounds. So so he was holding it like this and swinging it and turning his body. So he was doing at first look, I thought if I did that, I would rip my shoulder out. Basically. But assuming I do a lighter weight, like let's say like 2 pounds or 3 pounds or something, like is that?
Well, even so, when we're looking at specificity, there's if you search dynamic correspondence by Verkhoshansky, he said like a 5-thing criteria. I covered actually on the podcast. I did a solo podcast couple of weeks ago on it. And basically, it's like 5 criteria. I can't remember off the top of my head all of them because some of them are long-winded. But essentially, he gives these criteria to match an exercise that would be high transfer to the sport. And one of them is you're accentuating the regional force production. And an exercise you're talking about, because of gravity, as soon as the kettlebell gets over, then it's just kind of falling, right?
Yeah.
But with that throw, the highest effort portion is getting the guy off the ground over the shoulder. So you're already, the entire force curve of that exercise does not match that throw. So in terms of specificity and transfer, you're probably not getting the transfer you want. Now you're getting like a huge eccentric load on the way down because it's swinging fast, but it's not like you're trying to stop your opponent hitting the floor and, soften his landing at that point, right? So in terms of transfers, probably not much use or not very good use of time.
So next question I have is regarding equipment, right? So you guys mentioned the assault bike a lot, especially in your program, the PDF document, and also in your podcasts. Would you say that is the best equipment you could get for judo specific training if you had to make a purchase? And assuming you already have a weight rack and everything, and barbell.
Yeah, I think in terms of off-feet cardio equipment, it's probably one of your better options, just because it has a full body component to it. Because you got the handles at the top that move, you got the pedals for the biking, you have the screen that kind of gives you power output among some other variables on there. So in terms of just as an all-in-one off-feet tool, yeah, it's pretty good because you can do your harder intervals on there. You can do your easier intervals on there. Rowing machines are good too. The problem is with rowing machines. That was going to be my
next question. If you had to pick between the two, which one would you pick?
I would probably pick the air bike. The rowing machine's good. I love the rowing machine, but to do like 6 to 10 second efforts on it is relatively hard because you have to get the thing going, and the cadence, you don't have the cadence that you do on a bike, right?
I also think the technique on the rowing machine is harder to nail down properly compared to an air bike too.
Yeah,
you guys talked about that.
So that's just something to consider as well. But yeah, both are good options. It's just hard to do your short, fast intervals on a rower. And typically I'd recommend doing on something like, even like a spin bike is really good for your short, hard intervals.
Yeah. When people think about air bike, well, I do, because I do Tabatas on it. And I know you talked about what you think about Tabatas, but maybe we'll ask that right after this. But most people think of it like doing it until you puke, like short, explosive intervals, but it's possible to also do like zone 2 cardio or aerobic training on it just by going slower, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Correct.
And you also don't have to pedal. You can just do just the arms.
Yep.
All right. Okay.
That sounds lazy to me. If I was on a bike and it's like, just do the arms, like, then why am I here? I could be doing something else. I feel like I'm wasting space. Someone else could be on this.
I would like to go on a bike ride up to Santa Monica, actually, but then I think that the arm component of what you mentioned is pretty important, I think. Yeah. So are you more of a fan of an assault bike or the Rogue Echo bike? Like a belt driven or chain driven?
The belt driven is probably going to last you longer. I know my wife, she's owned CrossFit gyms and been around a lot of the assault bikes. Oh shit, I'm going to get sued or something.
Let's stick to chain driven versus
chain driven requires more maintenance.
Mark that,
Andy. And can break.
So I actually wanted a Rogue Echo bike, and my father-in-law bought me one, an assault bike, because when he asked what I wanted, I was like, I want an assault bike. But in my mind, assault bike is like, saying Kleenex for tissues. Like,
yep. Yeah.
So he actually ordered an assault bike. I'm like, wait, no, I meant the Rogue Echo bike.
When he told me, it was funny. The day he told me he got an assault bike, I was like, why'd you get your gun on your bike? Because I just know it's I was coming like the windmill bikes and stuff. Like, that windmill bike, the fan one.
Okay. So assuming I have the power, this is a scenario that I'm totally not talking about myself, but a friend.
My friend wants to know.
There is 7 weeks until senior nationals, right? And my friend wants to compete at the senior national. And
why don't you talk about one like that while he's right here?
No, it's not me. That's funny. I actually dislocated my shoulder at Winter Nationals in December. I had surgery about a week later. So I'm only maybe a month out of my sling. So I'm still, I can't compete till next year if I'm lucky.
Yeah. So I'm basically talking about me. So for example, for me, 7 weeks until Winter Nationals, because the PDF example you said you had on your program was a 14-week training program block, right? So how would I, on layman terms, how would you like program something for that, assuming I had access to a power rack and
what's been your training up until now?
Nothing.
Not much, because I've been traveling a lot. so let's say I'm starting from today. Like,
I would just do like the 3 or 4 weeks of the accumulation and just go straight to the peaking then.
Okay. Straight to, so skip the, perfect. And I would definitely use the assault bike and just a power rack. Should I like work in some medicine balls and throws?
There are some medicine ball throws in there in the program as well.
Okay.
So if you have medicine balls, even better. There's some sled stuff in there too, but you can, I think Cass gave some replacements in the Discord. You can ask anyway in there.
So what you're telling my wife is that I should buy a sled.
Or we should get a sled for the dojo maybe.
Oh, there you go. There's some good options with wheels as well. If you don't want to like drag shit on the ground, but they're way more expensive because they're the friction based ones.
That's one more thing to repair too.
Yeah, that is one more thing to potentially repair, but it means you don't fuck up your floors and all sorts of shit like that. So
yeah.
All right, we buy a carpet and we buy a sled.
We could. All right, so that's out of the way. So let's talk about diet. I know you're not a dietitian or whatever, but what do you have?
Let's preface that. I'm not a registered dietitian or anything. So whatever I say now, slightly ignore. But yeah, so I can speak to it.
So in the US, there's a lot of people, I'm just going to say people, not going to use this particular term, are registered or licensed nutritionists, which is different from dietitian. So you can be a nutritionist after taking like a 6-hour course on the weekend and paying like $500.
You can be a trainer like that too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's similar, right? Like level 1, whatever certification. But a dietitian in the US, you have to be registered. You have to go to school for it and get licensed. So is it the same thing in New Zealand like that? Or is it for nutritionist versus dietitian?
Dude, I'm not even sure. How it is in New Zealand with that.
All right. So what are your personal views on diet? And I know there's a lot of things going on about intermittent fasting and also like, should you be eating a lot of carbs? Because I was So I was watching, I was watching Tenry University's diet. There was like a Japanese YouTube channel where they go to all these top Japanese schools and see what they eat. And they did one episode on Tenry, which is one of the top judo universities in Japan. A lot of Olympic champions come out of there, and they just eat tons of rice, white rice. And I was surprised because I've always been told that I should eat brown rice if I had to eat rice, or stick to like potatoes or something like that, but avoid white rice. Do you have any sort of opinions on stuff like that?
Yeah. I've been lucky enough to learn from some really legit people. I don't know if you know Dr. Eric Helms.
No. Actually I do. I heard.
It was just on Marcus Rattel's channel.
Yeah. That's where I heard of him. I loved what you said. He's the one who did about the episode on contaminated supplements.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's a great episode too.
He's a friend and colleague from back in New Zealand. I learned a ton from him as well, and just other people as well. But general, just when we're talking about carbohydrates, they're your primary energy source. Most people make the mistake of removing them completely as competitive athletes, which is a big, big mistake to make because you will be very, very tired from your training. In terms of white rice, brown rice, etc., again, that's kind of really old. I guess it's extrapolated from old research around the glycemic index, right? People talk about spiking blood sugar. These are 1 to 100 in terms of how hard they spike their blood sugar. But the thing is, one, when you look at long-term in terms of dietary interventions, in terms of like gaining muscle, losing body fat, doesn't mean shit. 2, when you're combining with other stuff in your diet, proteins, fats within the meal and stuff, it automatically slows digestion down anyway. Doesn't matter. I eat white rice every damn day. That shit is, man, it's so cheap. It's like such an easy carb source. It goes with everything. Typically, when we're talking about diets, if anyone does count their calories and macros, typically I like to advise, again, not a registered dietitian, nutritionist or anything, but you're looking at anywhere from like 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight for protein, which is about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight for protein. Again, it can go higher as well if you're cutting a lot of weight. There's some nuance within that too. And then you're looking at around 25 to 30% of your total calories from dietary fat. And typically I like to be on that on that 25%. I typically like a slightly lower fat in terms of in that range. And then the rest is going to be carbohydrates. And like a 2,500 calorie diet, there's typically like 300, close to 300 or more grams of carbohydrates in a day, especially if you're training regularly. And even if you're just like after body composition, you can still do it that way. And it's better to do it that way because you have energy to train. I mean, I've cut 2 weight classes eating high carbohydrate when I was competing in Olympic weightlifting, from like the 94 kg class to 77s, did the whole entire thing eating high carbohydrate all the way through. Everything else I've done, I've had to cut away for different competitions, always high carbohydrate, because that's the energy you need to fuel. And then when you're going down all these different fad diets and shit, man, it's like
keto. I can't stand keto diet.
Oh, dude, they're all religions of each other, right? Carnivore, keto, intermittent fasting, stuff like that. But they all work through the same mechanism. Well, most people use them for I guess weight loss, but they all work through the same mechanism, and it's just removing something so you eat less calories, and it just becomes an energy balance game. So carnivore, you're only eating meat. Keto, you've removed carbohydrates. Intermittent fasting, you've just shortened the eating window, and all of those things have the same mechanism of reducing caloric intake, and therefore you're losing weight. With intermittent fasting, I'm not a huge fan of intermittent fasting. There's some good research showing if you skip breakfast, okay, when you compare 2 groups, one group ate breakfast, one group didn't eat breakfast, and then the group that didn't eat breakfast made up those calories at lunchtime, so basically like a double lunch. And then the other group kind of ate through. Then when they went to do their evening testing, they found the group that skipped breakfast still had reduced performance, even though they refed those calories at lunch. So by the end of the day, they were in the same caloric state, but they had missed breakfast. So in terms of like afternoon performance, you're better off eating breakfast in that instance versus skipping it. And then just if someone's just like a recreational, I guess, athlete, judo player, or just likes to lift and enjoys that kind of schedule where they don't have to eat till 10, 11 or 12, nothing wrong with doing it. It's just if you're trying to maximize, your training time and you're training on the mats, or maybe you're training in the morning, whatever it is, you're going to have to eat. And it's just, I don't know why you want to skip breakfast. Breakfast is damn good. Eggs and shit.
I get an upset stomach if I eat too early after I wake up. So I tend to eat at like 10 or 11.
Yep.
And so that's just me. But
personal preference though, right?
Yeah. How important is protein timing in your opinion? I've read like conflicting studies on
what's the stuff you've read? Or what's the things you've seen?
I've seen stuff that basically says it's not as important. There is some sort of effect, but in a grand scheme of things, it's not that important. And then the other stuff I have read says like, well, you need it. Like Mike Israetel talks about it from a bodybuilding perspective. You want your body to have a constant flow of protein basically throughout the day. So you do want to like have protein right after a workout, basically.
Yeah. So for him, it's about just maximizing every little thing, right? For I guess that kind of bodybuilding population to maximize hypertrophy. If you look in the grand scheme of things, the biggest factor is just total protein intake. That trumps all. If you're not even hitting your daily protein intake of that 0.7 to 1 gram per pound, it doesn't matter what else you do, protein timing, this, that. That is the number one. Now, ideally, you don't get that in one meal, and it's pretty damn hard to eat 180 grams of protein in one meal. So unless you're some kind of buffet.
Steak.
Even that, you probably have to eat 2 of them, a good couple of them, right?
2 tomahawk steaks. And a side of potatoes.
So it's more of a common sense thing around protein timing. Like, get your total protein intake in the day. Do it in a way where you're not going to eat like one meal and be so full you can't eat again, you can't move, you can't train. Split it up in a way where you're not stupidly hungry throughout the day. And then make sure you're not waiting too long after training to eat, because one, you're going to get very, very hungry. And 2, yes, there's no anabolic window and things like that when we used to have to drink, a protein shake as soon as you finish your last set. Otherwise, you're like straight catabolic. But, waiting stupidly long probably isn't a good idea either. So typically...
Could you explain really quick for the audience what the difference between anabolic and catabolic is?
Anabolic building, essentially, if we're talking about muscle building context, building muscle, catabolic, essentially wasting muscle or not building muscle. So, Yeah, it comes down to more conversations. The best way to do it is just plan it around your training, honestly. So like I think most people probably go to class in the evening, right? Maybe after work. So you might have breakfast, lunch, and then you might have like 3 or 4 o'clock snack or pre-training snack. And then you might have dinner after the training. That's 4 meals right there. And that's just an easy way of kind of spreading things out.
Yeah, like on Saturdays, I'm basically at the dojo the whole day. So I already don't eat breakfast. Sometimes I'll grab a bite to eat for lunch. But last night, I did exactly what you said, which is cram in all my macros at the end of the day before bed.
Dude, it's hard.
Which is not ideal. I went to sleep very, very bloated. So let's like tack this on to what we were just talking. How do you agree with the 80-20 rule? Are you familiar with that? Do you agree that's like a general thing? Like all this like min-maxing is not, it's only like squeezing out a little bit more than if you just stuck to the basics.
Most people are just trying to optimize everything when all that really matters for most of your progress is just consistency and being consistent in your training and having lots of good sessions, not really good, awesome. This is like the best session I've ever had. Just lots of good sessions, good days of eating. Just stack good. You don't need to, yes, every now and then you might have an awesome epic day of maybe your diet, an epic day of training that comes every now and then. You're also going to have really shit days of training, and maybe you're going to go eat, McDonald's and whatever else on another day. But those will be the small number of days that you're doing, stack good, and that's how you make progress. That's how, like, people think like, oh, elite athletes, they must train hard all the damn time. Professionals, that's all they do is train. Dude, there's days that are complete dog shit in that world. Most of the days are just getting in the gym and just doing the work because we have to do the work. And then we're on the field because we have to do that work. And it's just, I'm not going to say it's a grind because you're not trying to have people grind through things, but you're trying to create an environment for them that's at least fun and engaging. But at some point, it takes its toll. It takes its toll, and you just got to be able to stack good to make progress.
To make it sustainable, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump into some unrelated topics. Well, kind of related. So this is a very common thing in, I guess, recreational judo, or maybe in our dojo, is a lot of people, when they do randori, they like to sit out rounds in between. Would you agree that it's better for them to not sit out rounds and just go lighter, or just go lighter in general for the whole session? Or is it better to like go really hard for a couple rounds and sit out a couple of rounds kind of thing? And some of them feel like they need to do more cardio, like before they're able to start doing every single round. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Depends a lot on where you are in the training cycle, the person, and the training, maybe the outside judo training program, right? Typically, an easy way of looking at it, I'm assuming there's like randori probably after every class, maybe, or at the end of every class.
Most of it, yeah. And on Saturday, we do like 1 hour straight nonstop. Yeah.
So typically, like a good way of looking at it is, I mentioned about the high-low before when I was talking about conditioning, but it's essentially a way of structuring your training week. And it means that you can maximize the days that are high days, and you're basically adding all the high stress stuff that you're doing on one day and all the low stress stuff on the following day. And you've got this undulating effect throughout the week. And it means that you're not like redlining all week, because I mean, shit, we've all done it. Like going hard, you're doing hard randori, hard rolling Monday, then hard strength training Tuesday, but then also hard rolling again Tuesday night, and then Wednesday you're going hard again. Eventually something breaks. So instead of that, kind of pick your days where you know are going to be hard, and then pick days you know are going to be easy, and you can change based on what's happening. So, for example, I know when I was training, I was competing a year before my baby, a little over a year ago, in some submission-only events. And so I knew my gym schedule. I knew I was going Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, sometimes Saturday during the day. And I knew that Monday was going to be my harder day because it was more, I guess you could say, it was just a harder day typically in the gym. So I do harder rounds then. A few more rounds, harder rounds at the end. Tuesday was a leg lock day, and I knew it was going to be a little easier, and I knew I could take it a little easier on there. So I'd make that my easier day, quote unquote.
You guys had a specific day for leg locks.
We have leg lock classes. Wow. Yeah, it's pretty fucking legit too. So Mondays harder, Tuesdays were easier. And so I'd only do maybe 1 or 2 rounds, but I'd do them a little lighter versus on Monday, I might do more rounds and roll harder. Wednesday was some kind of heavy strength training stuff potentially. Then Thursday was again a lighter day because it was at that time it was like an escapes class, so it's just kind of escaping different positions. And yeah, while there's some positional stuff in there, still relatively like you didn't have to go super hard, and I didn't have to roll rounds at the end. Friday was a positional sparring class. I knew that was hard, so I would do that and do those rounds. And so that kind of gave this undulating effect throughout the week, where I could kind of plan and place my hard strength training on harder jiu-jitsu days. And if I needed to do any other easier stuff, if I want to do easier conditioning things, I could put those on the easier days. And that means I could have this hard work recovery throughout the week versus just trying to sit in this middle zone of everything hard, which becomes not hard because you're so fatigued. And then everything else becomes poorly done.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I don't know why when I was trying to put together a program, I was like, well, I don't want to do assault bike on the same day as hard randori. So let me put it on an easy day. I guess that makes more sense to put all the hard days together.
It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds counterintuitive when most people think about it. Even when I say it, kind of sounds counterintuitive because you're like, I've done that hard, so I'm adding more hard on top, so it's just going to be even harder. Versus if I put it on the next day, then I can just be fresher for that. But then you realize that you're just basically draining the well over and over as you go through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, Juan, do you have anything before I jump on to the one last thing I have? That's not related to strength and conditioning.
Well, let me ask you this then. This little interesting question. Like this is so. People might surprise people, but I'm not a big weightlifting guy. Okay, when I grew up doing karate and wrestling stuff, it's all about being on the mat. My karate instructor was like, hit pads and spar. My wrestling coach, be on the mat. We drill, you wrestle and stuff. If you want to do weight training stuff, you do it on your own. So I never grew up really weight training until I got older and I started doing weight training. So even with me as I get older, I'm not a big weight training guy, but I like doing stuff as weight training. That's not exactly weight training. Like I love flipping tires. That's the weirdest thing. I started flipping tires. I just got addicted to it. I love doing sledgehammer on a tire. I don't know why. I enjoy doing sledgehammer. I enjoy doing kettlebells okay with me and stuff. I love battle rope, doing all kinds of stuff in my battle rope workout. And I love doing medicine ball stuff, like throwing it up, down, all that kind of stuff. Is there a big difference in like when you like kind of going back to powerlifting a little bit, but like doing those kind of workouts for powerlifting or lifting with weights compared to doing these kind of other things with equipment or things?
Yeah, typically it's the stimulus that you can get, right? So when you're using, say, sledgehammers, battle ropes, medicine balls, and even flipping a tire, the loading you're getting from those is very small compared to, say, having a bar on your back and you're doing heavier squats. So the adaptations you typically get a little different. Now, that's not to say what you're doing is wrong or you shouldn't do what you're doing. Obviously, you need to do what you enjoy. One, if you don't enjoy lifting weights, you're not trying to become the top judo guy in the world, and you're just doing it to kind of keep yourself in shape and things, no problem at all. If someone was doing that, but they had aspirations of trying to be judo national team, compete Olympics, whatever it is, there will probably be some issues because you'll be lacking big, likely, and muscle mass. You'd be lacking big in that maximal strength stimulus, which becomes very important in more grindy-based sports, kind of like judo, where you're gripping onto people, having to move other people around. I'm a big fan of Olympic weightlifting movements for grappling sports because of that, because you have to be able to manipulate other human beings and essentially moving other heavy people around pretty quickly. And weightlifting kind of does that well. Obviously, there's a technical element to it. It doesn't mean you have to do it, but it's just an option. So yeah, you have those. I guess because for someone who's trying to be a top judo guy, you have those potentially working against you. Now, it's not to say you can't get there. The best guys are at the top, despite what they do, regardless. But yeah, it's something maybe just to think about for someone to do. I mean, you could even start doing some like a couple of sets of squats or a couple of sets of heavy presses, after or even before some of that work, and that could be just your very basic, easy strength stimulus.
I do because I do that stuff sometimes, like not a lot. Like I said,
yeah.
I find weightlifting to me very boring because it goes back to the way I learned it. And this is like 20 years ago. I was in, over 20 years ago, back when I was in high school, it was a whole thing of like, you lift heavy, then a light, and then heavy again and stuff. And you do those big long breaks in between, which I hated doing long, big breaks in between. Then when I learned supersets, it's like, why didn't no one tell me supersets before? Why did someone tell you do this and then do that? That makes so much more sense.
Yeah, definitely time saver. Supersets, for sure. Push, pull. You can do some kind of lower body and then superset with like neck or some kind of shoulder stuff. Yeah, there's heaps of different things you can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just to build upon that, what is your opinion on deadlifts? I'm just asking that because I already know your answer for that, but just so people know, like, what's your opinion on deadlifts?
I don't typically program the conventional deadlift for most athletes. That's not to say they aren't good. That's not to say that you shouldn't do them. That's not to say that if you enjoy them, you shouldn't do them. It's not to say they're bad, dangerous, whatever it is. I just typically find if you are combat athletes are strapped for time when lifting, right? It's supposed to complement their sport. And if I'm choosing two big rock lower body movements, and typically your two big rock lower body movements are squat and deadlift, and obviously you've got different variations around that. I'm only typically going to pick one, because if you're doing two, that's two pretty big days of lifting. That's generally hard to recover from. Deadlifts are known as the hardest lift to recover from, especially if you're going heavy a lot. And most combat athletes have pretty funny lower backs. And that goes with a lot of different sports, including rugby as well, where we never did a conventional deadlift. And I'll add to that point as well, if you're doing more speed power-based stuff that is, say, Olympic weightlifting derivatives, you're covering that movement pattern anyway. So adding a deadlift after, say you like doing power cleans, adding a deadlift after power cleans, it doesn't make any sense. Yes, you still need a maximal strength stimulus, but you've just pulled from the floor. I'm not going to pull from the floor again and start to tax the same muscles over and over. So that's kind of my general philosophy around that. I'd rather pick the squat again, because you have that eccentric component. With the deadlift, you don't. You have that deep knee bend, which you don't typically get from a lot of other exercises. So you get the benefits from that as well. A little more versatile, a lot of different squat variations you can do. You can even do them single leg. And yeah, I think that covers everything. I think most people as well, just anecdotal, people will talk about, they deadlift or they feel very sore and stiff the following day, etc. That's not to say like deadlifts will make you sore and stiff and injured, etc. But a lot of people kind of feel that way as well when they do a lot of heavy deadlifts. And when you swap that out for things like front squats and you're doing things like power cleans or clean pulls or snatch high pulls, etc., you tend to not have those issues.
Yeah, I personally have a lot of back issues when I was deadlifting, so I just dropped it, and my back feels much better.
Yeah, you don't have to do any exercise. There's no exercise you have to do. There's just some movement patterns that you should generally do just to cover your bases. And you can kind of pick what fits with your body, right? Like Romanian deadlifts are awesome. Like Romanian deadlifts, I love using those. It's a pure hip hinge exercise. You get to stretch on the hamstrings, you nail the glutes. Like the deadlift is considered a hip hinge, but you don't get that. You don't get that huge stretch on the hamstrings. You don't load. Okay, you do load the glutes well, but you don't have that eccentric on the way down. So it's kind of like I'd rather do a pure hip hinge and a squat than try and kind of have this hybrid thing. Now you can also trap bar deadlift. It's also a good option. Much easier on the lower back and things like that too. And you can use high handles. You reduce the range of motion, so that works well as well. But yeah, personal preference, all that kind of stuff.
I've been wanting to get a trap bar for my home gym, so that's probably one of the next things I'm going to buy. Because
get an open-ended one too.
Open-ended one, okay.
Yeah.
So is there a difference between Romanian deadlifts and stiff leg deadlifts?
Yes. I think people have different definitions of it, but typically I see Romanian deadlift starts from the top, stiff-legged deadlift starts from the floor, and Romanian deadlift doesn't reach the floor. So Romanian deadlift, you're pushing the hips back as far as possible. And as soon as your hips start moving back, you thrust your hips forward. And typically that means the bar only gets to like your knees, because to go further, you got to have long as fuck hamstrings. Yeah. Because the hamstring stretch will be stupidly tight. With the stiff-legged deadlift, you have a little more back involvement because you're starting from the floor. Your legs are in a similar position, only slightly bent, and you're kind of initiating from like not a fully straight leg position, but a slightly bent knee position to the top. So two different lifts, essentially.
Okay. Any more questions, Juan, before I...
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the one last thing I want to talk about is I'm actually really looking forward to the new episode you're about to drop, and it has to do with the ecological dynamics. What it has been your experience with it? Do you use it in your strength and conditioning training programs for your clients and your own jiu-jitsu training? So I'm kind of curious about that.
Regarding strength and conditioning, no, typically doesn't fit within the strength and conditioning realm. When I was in professional rugby, that did underpin my philosophy a lot. That was back in, I think, 2017, 2018, when I really started diving into it a lot. So Franz Bosch's book is a really good one, that Strength Training Coordination.
I just ordered it.
Oh, there we go. It's a mind fuck, that book, but it's good. And then I was lucky enough to learn from one of his students, John Pryor, at I don't know what it's called. I guess it was a conference. It was like a 5-day thing, strength and conditioning thing. I learned from him firsthand all the different things on basically on that approach.
It's not Elevate, right?
No.
Okay.
What's Elevate?
I think I might be misquoting, but I thought that was the strength and conditioning conference. That
no, it was Gain. Gain with Vern Gambetta, and I learned a bunch of different stuff there, and kind of went down the rabbit hole of the idea of essentially creating problem-solving athletes. Right, someone, you're not telling them what to do; they're figuring out the puzzle for themselves. So yeah, strength conditioning, not so much within the sport itself. Yes, and I'm not an ecological dynamics guru or anything like that. I just have a general understanding of kind of the outcomes in sport coaching that we want from the athletes that can be integrated within strength conditioning. Again, probably more geared towards team sports within strength conditioning, because I think strength conditioning for combat sports, you probably won't even be touching this stuff. But the idea is that you want an athlete that has seen as many different scenarios, situations as possible, and then has the toolbox to solve whatever's happening in front of them themselves. And it involves training with a lot of failure, training with a lot of different, what they call constraints. So essentially you're just like changing the environment or changing the task about what the person can do to try to get some kind of desired outcome out of it. And good examples, I can give some different examples from different sports. Like within rugby, for example, we play a lot of quote unquote agility games, 3v2, 2v1, counterattack games, defenders coming from different angles, balls starting from different places, things like that. So then you're essentially never just repeating the same thing over and over. You're getting different looks, basically.
Yeah.
You can do the same thing within the sport itself. And a really cool thing that Val Jiu-Jitsu here in Austin, where I train, they've kind of changed the way it's not just drilling a move for 45 minutes now and then doing some positional rolling. Now we're starting straight with these types of, I guess, games. And some good examples, stuff we've done recently, it could be as simple as, okay, you're in single leg X or Ashigarami, and the person standing is just trying to stand and balance. The person on the bottom is just trying to sweep. And these games allow you to explore the environment and explore what's, I guess, the different looks and reactions your opponent's going to give you, so you can start to problem solve what's happening. Because I'm sure every single person is going through where you're practicing one technique for 45 minutes and then you go to do it in positional and you can't even get to the first step.
Yeah.
Because they know exactly what's coming. You've both just drilled it for 45 minutes with no resistance. And then you start getting these different looks coming back at you and you have to try to figure all these different things out.
And people kind of revert back to what they're comfortable with too. So they're not
exactly. And you won't even
within those constraints.
You won't even practice the technique, right?
Yeah.
So these different games kind of allow you to explore and fail and try things and get the feedback from your opponent about what would actually happen when you get into these positions. And it's combat sports are slowly changing down this route. I think obviously more traditional schools are still, you're doing like your 20 Toriando passes and then you're getting to mount and then armbar and then doing that again and over and over and then training this new technique. But these games, they give a little bit of what they call aliveness into your training, because your opponent has to react to what you're doing. And then you have set outcomes, or you have set rules within there to constrain it to whatever you're trying to do. So another one we're doing recently is like starting De La Riva guard, and your goal is to sweep. The guy on top is trying to escape, but you don't have to stay in this guard. You can transition to other things. So then it kind of opens things up into different areas. Now, obviously within other sports like even like judo, MMA, you might shorten, make it smaller, the training space, so you have more engagements going on in there. You might, within MMA, you might start in, say, the corner of the cage and have to try to fight your way out. You might be, the defender might only be allowed to use their footwork to evade. They're not allowed to throw any punches. The attacker might be able to strike and shoot shots, things like that. So it's a lot of stuff that I think a lot of coaches were kind of already doing too, like in terms of creating these different scenarios and games. I think it's just now becoming a little more mainstream where people are picking up these different things and kind of just labeling it, what they're doing is as ecological. But regardless, it's a step in the right direction, I think, just going from straight trying to drill the exact movement with no resistance to actually doing something that has some feedback to it.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of coaches do it, but they also have a lot of things that aren't ecologically sound, and it's like removing those things that are not optimizing the practice is the way I see it. So they are doing some of it, I think, but it's definitely optimizing it. Have you personally seen like an improvement in yourself compared to the old training methods?
Yeah, I love it. The fact you can explore different things and just try shit and know you're going to fail at it, and then see different openings, see how the opponent escapes whatever you're doing, so you instantly learn, okay, that's how you escape. Yeah. So you start doing that when it's your turn to be at the top, like that kind of thing. Yeah, you're pretty much doing an hour of positional sparring versus going back and forth doing the same movement pattern with no resistance over and over, right?
So are you guys doing this in a gi or no gi?
He does no gi, Anthony.
No gi only.
No gi only.
No more gis, man. I'm out of the gi.
No gi guy.
I'm all no gi.
I'm this close to calling him a catch wrestler. I'm this close to, he's part of the catch wrestling family with me, all right?
There's because there's a lot of ecological approach content out there for no gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm trying to I've been experimenting in my class and trying to do the same thing, but the gi just complicates things so much. And trying to apply, it's so hard to set constraints with the gi versus without the gi. There's just much less variables that you have to constrain. And you said that you like exploring and the failure and stuff. Have you seen other people get frustrated from the failure and reverting to the old methods or something that's not intended to be constrained?
Wasn't the drill? No, because that's the drill or game, whatever you want to call it. No, because that's just kind of the rules of that game. So, I mean, I'm not too sure. There's I'm not coaching it, I'm just doing it. So I don't need to pay attention to what else is going on. But
I just add a little context. So for yesterday, I had them for 45 minutes of the class. I just had them play this game, right? Or attacker or defender role. Yes. And their goal is to do any sort of turn throw where they load the person onto their back. I don't care how they do it. I didn't tell them, I didn't show them how to do it. I just said, I just want you to give the guy a piggyback ride and throw them, basically. And the only constraint I gave them about what they can't do is also Dogati, the outside leg trip, whatever you want to call it. And most of them tried the back carrying thing for 3 or 4 rounds. They got frustrated enough that they just started ignoring the constraint and started doing the Sotogari. So I feel like that frustration stops them from trying things. And I guess did
you give them any options?
What do you mean by options? Because I told them they can do anything. I just want them to load the other person onto their back and throw them.
Sometimes it's good to show a couple of things because some people might not even know, especially if you have ramp beginners, depends, of course. Yeah. But some people might not even know how to get to what they need to do as well. Yeah.
So right before we started the game, I told them, okay, your only constraint is that you need to start off this one grip with this one hand. So on the lapel, although I don't care what you do with your right hand. Now I want you to lift the other person up onto your back and piggyback them across the room. That was the only instruction I gave in the beginning. And at first they struggled. They're trying to do certain things. I'm like, well, now you're not using that grip that I told you to have. And then eventually after a few minutes, they figured it out. So they do know how to load people onto their back. But when doing it against resistance, then I think that's when they found it was kind of hard. So
yeah, you should definitely get Scott Severite on the podcast too to talk about that.
He's another no guy. So
well, yeah, he's an MMA dude as well.
Yeah,
but I mean the concepts would remain the same. I'm sure they'll have a bunch of stuff. John Mackey's also doing a lot of pieces with kickboxing, but he's still got some really good stuff too. So those guys would be awesome to talk to with that.
Yeah, I'm looking. We're having an in-house tournament soon against another dojo, and I have a couple of people in my class that has not been to the other classes yet, and they're kind of beginner with like maybe 6 months of training. So I can't wait to see how they fare against like people that are more experienced. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yep. All right. Do you guys have anything else, Juan? Like,
no, I've had a very interesting time listening to this. Learning some new things. Trying out some new things in my head I'm thinking about. I think it's really good. So, since we're going to wrap this up now, please let the audience know where they can find you, where they can look you up at, and where they can just look you up, I guess.
Go to sweetscienceoffighting.com. Same thing on Instagram, Sweet Science of Fighting. I've been posting some reels and shit on there. YouTube, Sweet Science of Fighting. Wait, I think YouTube. Yeah, I think YouTube, Sweet Science of Fighting.
You have two channels, right?
Got three. Got okay. Sweet Science of Fighting. The red one is like I break down professional fighters training and do some videos on there. The blue one is the podcast. That's Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. And then I have a green one that's Sweet Science of Fighting BJJ Instructionals. And that's where my coach is breaking down matches and we're doing like free instructional videos. So we just did some side control escape ones recently. I'm going to get some others up on De La Riva Guard and stuff like that. But yeah, no, those are all free in there too. So yeah, check all those out.
Right.
Great. Thank you. Please, people, look him up. He has some great stuff out there. Anthony, thank you for bringing him on the show and thank you for being on the show.
No,
yeah, maybe I'd like to bring Cass on someday, do it. But I think I need to like brush up on my understanding because I don't want to be asking stupid questions. But
no, you should bring him on. He'll be a good guest to have. He can explain anything about the program and all the different strength conditioning stuff he's doing. They have Olympics coming up in a few months.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be good to be able to dive into all his competition tactics, warm ups, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I might bring him on after the Olympics so he doesn't feel like he's giving out secrets or.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers.
Wow, what a great interview that was. I learned a lot. Anthony, did you learn a lot? Yeah,
I mean, I already listened to the podcast like over 4 or 5 times. I'm going to tell you this because there's always a lot of things to pick up on because it was going way over my head. And I was writing down notes. Like I'll be like, hey, Google, because I'm driving when I'm listening to this. I was like, hey, Google, add note, look up what this term means. And I go home and look up ChatGPT to tell it to explain to me what certain things are. So I still learned a lot. Looking forward to some of the episodes that I have in queue to listen on this podcast. I think it's a great resource. But I think the major takeaway from that episode is the 80-20 rule that we talked about briefly. But the thing is, just be consistent. That's the most important thing. Don't do analysis by paralysis. Just do something and do it consistently, and you'll see gains in the long term.
Very good interview. I just recommend, go check out his website, go check out his YouTube channels. And he's very open about what he's talking about. I mean, he's a no gi guy, so he's not about the gi stuff all the time. And I was pleasantly surprised. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So
maybe in the future, because I talked about how I bought the program last year, not last week, and I'm working my way through it. I have some family stuff going on that you know about. So that's going to slow me down in testing out the program, but I intend to test out the program. And obviously with nationals being only 7 weeks away and the potential of me having to fly out again and travel, then I don't know how it's going to work out, but I will test the program and I will probably review it in the future. So.
All right. Sounds great. So with that, Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram at Tatami Talk. You can follow me on Instagram at @Jerry_1. You can follow Anthony on Instagram at Anthony Throws. You can follow us on YouTube at Tatami Talk. You can follow us on what's that other line? Is it Lines? Yeah, Lines. Threads, whatever. Yeah, we don't have a Line account, and we're gonna make all these crazy ass accounts and stuff. Yeah. We have a Line account too. You don't until
we start breaking into the Japanese market. We're not gonna have a Line account.
With Threads account. So, and if you have any questions, things you want us to talk about, things you want us to go over, you can always hit us up at tatamitalk@gmail.com. Anthony, is there anything I'm forgetting?
Nope, that's it.
All right, that's it. So with that, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to
check out the Strength and Conditioning program on Sweet Science of Fighting and slap the mat. All right.